At the rear of a grand, ivy-covered mansion, nestled behind wrought iron gates and manicured gardens, stood a small, weathered shed. It was the kind of place no one paid attention to, except for the girl inside. 5-year-old Emily Reynolds sat quietly on the wooden floor, her small hands pressed against the shed's narrow window. She didn't cry anymore, not out loud. Her large eyes, the color of damp earth, held a silence deeper than words. She watched the wind move through the roses outside, tracing the petals dance with invisible patterns in the air. Inside the main house, her father, Thomas Reynolds, prepared for yet another high-profile business meeting as the CEO of a multinational real estate firm. Image was everything to him. Sharp suits, polished shoes, and pristine family photos in the press. There was no room in that image for a daughter who flapped her hands or didn't answer when spoken to. No space for a child who hummed to herself and refused eye contact. She'll come inside when she learns to act like a normal child, he had once told the staff coldly. But out in the yard, someone else was watching. Bruno had once been the pride of the Reynolds estate, a powerful, alert German shepherd trained by the best handlers. He was meant to protect the mansion, patrol the grounds, and greet guests with dignified obedience. But lately, Bruno had abandoned all of that. Instead of circling the perimeter or sitting proudly at Thomas's feet during meetings, Bruno had taken up silent residence near the shed. Each morning, just after sunrise, he would trot across the dewy lawn and lie down outside the door where Emily was kept. He didn't move unless she did. Inside, Emily had begun to wait for him. When she heard the soft click of his claws on the stone path, something shifted in her small body. The rocking that had once been frantic became rhythmic. The humming that often echoed with distress softened into quiet melodies. She pressed her forehead against the wooden slats of the door, sensing his presence just beyond. Bruno, in his own way, understood that the little girl inside that shed was not wild or broken. She was alone and she was afraid. His instincts, so finely tuned to threat, recognized something different here. A child who needed protection not from the outside world, but from the silence inside her own. So he stayed, not out of duty, but because something in her fragility called out to the gentlest part of him. One afternoon, Thomas happened to notice. "What is that dog doing?" He snapped from the patio, a glass of scotch in hand. Lying there like a statue. He's encouraging her behavior. No one answered him. Later that evening, when Marta went to bring Emily her dinner, apple slices spaced just right on a ceramic plate, she saw something she hadn't expected. Emily was tapping her fingers gently against the wood in a slow, repeated rhythm. Outside, Bruno's tail wagged in sync. A connection was forming, quiet, consistent, and invisible to anyone who refused to see. To Thomas, it was nonsense. But to Emily, Bruno wasn't just a dog. He was the only living being who met her exactly where she was. Without judgment, without demand, just presence. And in that presence, Emily began to feel seen. Marta had worked for the Reynolds family longer than most of the furniture had been in the house. She had seen the rise of Thomas's empire, the elegant parties, the polished interviews. But she had also seen the quiet crumbling that came after his wife's sudden passing, and most painfully, how that grief had been redirected toward their only child. Each morning, Marta carried a tray to the shed. She prepared it exactly the way Emily needed. Apple slices in neat rows, a sandwich with the crust cut off, and nothing on the plate allowed a touch. It wasn't something Thomas ever noticed or cared to ask about, but Marta knew. She noticed how Emily would push away anything that didn't feel just right. She never spoke when she delivered the tray. Words felt too sharp for that space. Instead, she would slide the small wooden door open just a few inches, place the tray gently on the ground, and pause for just a second to meet the girl's eyes. Sometimes Emily looked back. Sometimes she didn't. But Marta waited anyway. Bruno was always there, lying near the entrance. His eyes followed Marta as she moved, then shifted back to Emily. The dog's loyalty had grown into something deeper, a silent understanding, as if he had taken upon himself to guard not just her body, but her dignity. Whenever Emily trembled, Bruno would lift his head. When she curled into herself, he inched closer to the door. Marta saw it all, and with each passing day, the guilt grew heavier on her chest. She had followed Thomas's rules for too long. But rules didn't comfort children. Presence did. Quiet kindness did. And maybe, just maybe, it was time to stop being quiet. What she didn't know was that help was already on its way. Unexpected, but exactly what Emily needed. The black sedan rolled up the long cobblestone driveway earlier than anyone expected. Martia spotted it first from the kitchen window, her hands still wet from rinsing dishes. She froze. Only one person she knew drove that particular car. Claire Morgan, Thomas's sister-in-law. Claire hadn't set foot on the Reynolds estate since the funeral of her sister, Lily. The distance wasn't just physical, it was emotional. After Lily's death during childbirth, Claire had tried to stay involved in Emily's life, but Thomas, buried in grief and pride, had pushed her away. He didn't want her soft ideas about parenting or her modern theories on autism. He hadn't even allowed her to say goodbye to her niece. Now she was back. Thomas opened the door with a tight smile. "Claire, what a surprise." Claire's expression didn't soften. Her honey-colored eyes, so much like her late sister's, scanned the grand entryway, then flicked past him toward the garden. "Not really a surprise, Thomas. I sent you 3 messages. You didn't reply." "I've been busy," he said, already uncomfortable. "Lots of moving parts of the company." "I'm not here for small talk," Claire cut in. "Where's Emily?" There was a pause. One beat too long. "She's not well. Resting." Claire narrowed her eyes. "Where?" Before he could stop her, she stepped past him and into the hallway. Her instincts kicking in, she didn't need a map. Her feet carried her toward the garden. And soon, her ears picked up something odd, a low hum, like a child singing to herself. And then, the unmistakable sound of claws clicking softly against stone. Bruno appeared from around the corner, tail raised, ears forward. His posture wasn't aggressive, just alert. He stood directly in her path, as if guarding a secret. But then something shifted. He paused, studying her face. He didn't growl. He didn't lunge. His ears relaxed, tail low, body calm. Bruno had seen many strangers, but this one was different. Her scent, her stillness, the way she moved. It all felt right. She wasn't here to control, to criticize, to fear. She was here for Emily. Bruno saw it in her eyes. She could help. Then he let out a soft whine, as if to say, "Emily is here." That's when Claire saw it. Past the flower beds, behind a curtain of hedges and canvas drapery, was a hidden structure, a shed, a cage in disguise. Inside, a small girl sat cross-legged on the floor, swaying gently, eyes focused on nothing and everything. Tears welled up in Claire's eyes, hot and instant. The sight of her niece, alone, unwashed, and forgotten, broke something inside her. She remembered holding Emily as a newborn, her tiny fingers wrapping around hers. Now those same hands were trembling in a cage. Grief, rage, and fierce protectiveness surged all at once. Claire's breath caught. "Emily," she whispered, stepping forward. Bruno looked up at her, his eyes calm, steady, then quietly lay down beside the shed. He knew she belonged there, and finally, so did hope, Claire didn't hesitate. She crossed the garden with firm, measured steps, brushing past the hedges and weathered canvas that had been crudely set up to hide the truth. When she reached the shed door, her hands trembled, not with fear but with fury, barely held in check. Inside, Emily sat motionless. Her knees were drawn to her chest, her arms wrapped around them tightly. Her long brown hair was tangled, her skin pale beneath the afternoon light, seeping through the cracks. She didn't react to commotion outside, but when Claire knelt down and gently whispered her name again, something flickered in Emily's eyes. Recognition. It was faint, fragile, but it was there. Bruno sat beside them, his body still, ears perked as if anchoring them both in place. Behind them, hurried footsteps sounded on the stone path. "Thomas." Claire barked. He stopped, his voice cold and strained. "Step away from her. You don't understand. This is for her safety." Claire stood slowly and turned to face him, her eyes blazing. "No, this is for your comfort, not hers." "She can't function around people," he snapped. "She lashes out. She's 5, Claire interrupted, her voice sharp with grief. And she's not broken. She's overwhelmed. You lock your daughter in a shed because you were too proud to say you didn't understand her. Behind the shed door, Emily began to rock again, faster this time. The raised voices had pierced her calm like glass shattering. Her fingers clutched at her sleeves, twisting them tight. Her humming returned, shaky and off-key, like a child trying to block out the world. A storm only she could feel. She was scared and utterly alone. Thomas faltered. Something in him shifted. For the first time, he didn't see a problem to fix, but a child. His child. Frightened and small, clinging to herself like a raft in a storm. Marty appeared behind him, her apron still on, eyes wide. She didn't speak, but the look in her eyes said everything. And somehow, that quiet gaze struck deeper than any accusation ever could. Claire knelt again, this time slowly removing a small object from her pocket. A soft blue scarf. Lily's. She held it out to Emily. The girl blinked, then stretched one trembling hand forward. Her fingers brushed the scarf. She didn't take it, but she touched it. The fabric was soft, familiar. In that brief touch, something sacred stirred in her chest. A whisper of memory, of warmth long lost. It felt like a part of her mother had come back. Bruno let out a slow, approving breath and rested his head on his paws. The shed door creaked open for the first time in months. Claire didn't force it. She simply unlatched the rusted lock, pushed the door just wide enough to let in fresh air and sunlight, then stepped back. No words, no expectations. Bruno was the first to move. He padded forward slowly, his paws barely making a sound on the stone path. He stopped at the threshold and sat down, turning his head toward Emily as if to say, "It's safe now." Inside, Emily didn't budge. She stared at the light spilling onto the floor, blinking at its brightness. Her body remained curled, but her fingers twitched. The air smelled different, cleaner. Then she glanced at Bruno. His eyes met hers with a look that went deeper than any command. In them, she saw something powerful. Comfort, yes, but also quiet encouragement. There was no pressure, only presence. His gaze seemed to say, "Come on, little one, step into the light. Find the freedom that's always belonged to you. Find the part of yourself you thought you lost." Something stirred in her chest. For the first time in so long, she didn't feel trapped by the world. She felt seen, and in that moment, she leaned into the only trust she knew. Her lips moved as she began to hum, soft and uncertain. Claire waited. 10 minutes passed, then 15, and then one bare foot moved. It touched the edge of the light. Bruno stood, took 2 steps back, and wagged his tail gently. Emily rose slowly, unsteady like a fawn learning to walk. She stepped out of the shed, blinking hard, her eyes adjusting to a world that had long been reduced to shadows and wooden walls. The grass beneath her toes was cool and damp. She looked down, wiggling her feet in it, fascinated. Her hands rose and began to draw invisible shapes in the air. Not frantic, curious. She walked in a slow circle, trailing her fingers through leaves and flower petals, humming as she went. Bruno followed a few steps behind, always near, always steady. Marty watched from the kitchen window, tears silently tracing her cheeks. Claire stood a few paces away, hands still, breath held. Thomas, standing at the garden's edge, said nothing, but inside, something twisted. He saw her clearly now, not as a disruption, but as a child, too pale, too thin, her cheeks hollow from solitude. The sharp guilt he had buried for so long rose like bile in his throat. What had he done to his daughter? The morning after Emily stepped out of the shed, something felt different on the Reynolds estate. The house was quieter, but not in the hollow way it had been for years. It was the quiet of something waiting to begin again. Thomas stood in his office, staring out the window with a cup of coffee that had long gone cold. Below, he watched Emily crouch near the hydrangeas, placing flower petals in a careful circle on the grass. Bruno lay beside her, alert but calm. Then suddenly, she smiled. It wasn't a forced smile or one born of trying to please. It was pure, Spontaneous, something soft and childlike rising to the surface, even for just a second. And in that second, Thomas's breath caught in his throat. Lily used to smile like that. He murmured to no one, his voice rough. Exactly like that when she was near the garden. He turned away from the window, but the image of Emily's face lingered, haunting and familiar. He'd barely slept. The memory of her flinching, rocking, humming in isolation was burned into him now. Not because he hadn't noticed before, but because he had noticed and walked away from it. In his mind, he saw the only photo he kept hidden in a drawer, Lily in her hospital bed, weak but smiling, holding newborn Emily on her chest. That fragile joy, now a lifetime ago, twisted like a blade in his heart. He had failed them both, wife and daughter. Claire entered the room without knocking, a folder in hand. "We need to talk." Thomas turned, exhausted. "I know what you're going to say." "Do you?" she asked quietly, but not unkindly. Claire opened the folder. Inside were blueprints. Simple sketches, outlines of the therapeutic space tucked into the far end of the property. Sensory-friendly rooms, music areas, quiet gardens, animal therapy zones. "It's not a clinic," she said. "It's a place where children like Emily can just be, where they're not corrected, just accepted." Thomas stared at the sketches. His voice came slower this time, deeper. "I was so focused on everything she couldn't do," he said, barely above a whisper, "that I forgot to see the unique gift she already had." Claire didn't speak. She just let the silence settle. He looked out the window again. Emily now sat beside Bruno, whispering something only the dog could understand. Her fingers arranging yellow petals in a perfect arc. "If we do this," Thomas said, "we do it right. No more hiding her. No more shame." He took a breath and added, "Society can judge, but real love, real understanding, is worth far more than any reputation I've ever built." Claire's eyes softened. That's what Lily believed, too. Thomas nodded slowly. The way of the past didn't disappear, but something had shifted, and in its place, the outline of something new was beginning to form. This wasn't just an idea anymore. It was a beginning of redemption. The sun rose bright and steady over the Reynolds estate as final touches were made to the new center. Balloons, handmade signs, and paper butterflies lined the walkways, decorated by children who now laughed freely in the gardens where silence once ruled. Emily stood quietly by the sensory path, holding her kaleidoscope. She wore a soft blue dress. Her hair, though still slightly tousled, was brushed, and her bare feet pressed gently into the grass. Thomas approached slowly. He didn't speak at first. He had learned now that presence was louder than words. Bruno stood beside Emily. As Thomas drew near, the dog looked up once, then calmly stepped aside. Emily turned. Her eyes found his. There was no fear, only curiosity and something else. Recognition. Then, in a voice barely louder than wind through leaves, she whispered, "Dad." Thomas froze. That one word undid him. Joy cracked open inside his chest, followed by grief that rose like a wave. It wasn't just a word. It was forgiveness wrapped in a single breath. The years of absence, the silence, the cage, it all pressed down on him at once. But then she smiled just a little, and he knew he had not been too late. Tears slid down his cheeks as he crouched before her. "Thank you," he whispered, not just a word, but for the second chance, for the grace he had never deserved but received anyway, for the freedom to love her as she was.